This presentation is on e-waste recycling and how the United States is bargaining with environmental consciousness. Globalization, as defined by rich people like us, is a very nice thing. You're talking about the internet, you're talking about cell phones, you're talking about computers. This doesn't affect 2/3 of the people in the world. Or does it? Where will your discarded BlackBerry or PC end up? It may end up in China. These pictures show discarded circuit boards in the town of Guiyou, China, where scientists found environmental contamination from crude recycling practices. A boy in Guiyou holds the front frame of a discarded Nokia monitor. CRT monitors are considered an environmental and health hazard because their tubes and glass contain several pounds of lead. Another piece of electronic scrap found near a factory in Guiyou shows an ownership tag from the New York Stock Exchange. Greenpeace and the Computer Take Back campaign say vast amounts of gear are routinely and often illegally shipped to poorer countries with lower environmental standards. Electronic scrap from Europe and the United States is littering the streets of Lagos, Nigeria, according to the environmental watchdog group Basel Action Network. In a report published October 24, 2005, this network says as much as 75% of exported gear intended for refurbishment and reuse is actually not marketable or repairable. Another picture shows workers in Lagos unloading a sea container filled with television sets and PC monitors. Imported electronic goods also include cast-off cell phones. Nigeria has a robust and legitimate market for old electronic gear that can be repaired or updated, but much of the e-scrap can't be reused and ends up in dumps. So what? Improperly discarded electronics can create hazardous waste from flame retardants used in plastics and circuit boards, solders containing lead and tin, barium and lead in cathode ray tubes, mercury and beryllium alloys in connectors, among other potential environmental hazards. Entire families, from young to old, engage in dangerous practices like burning computer wire to expose copper, melting circuit boards in pots to extract lead and other materials, or dousing the boards in powerful acids to remove gold. This results in a cycle of disease and disability. But we do recycle. All major US PC vendors have recycling programs in place for used IT equipment. However, products are often sold to brokers for disposal and wind up in countries such as Nigeria, but also elsewhere in Africa and in Asia. Some of the equipment is repaired or refurbished for use in those countries, becoming important components in bridging the digital divide. However, up to 75% is beyond repair and ends up in dumps or landfills. Much of the growth in the IT sector in developing countries has been fueled by the important hand-me-down used equipment from rich developed countries whose consumers are all too happy to find buyers for it. As a result, many brokers and businesses have sprung up to channel used equipment from north to south, rich to poor. Seen at ground level, the massive importation of used equipment is a success story seriously clouded by the smoke of a growing environmental and health disaster. The reality is that this new trade is not driven by altruism, but rather by the immense profits that can be made through it, and those involved are oblivious to or unconcerned with its adverse consequences. Too often, justifications of building bridges over the digital divide are used as excuses to obscure and ignore the fact that these bridges are double as toxic waste pipelines to some of the poorest communities and countries in the world. While supposedly closing the digital divide, we are actually opening a digital dump. What can we do? We should start at the product design level. An example is RoHS in the European Union. It's an initiative to pressure electronics manufacturers to remove toxic chemicals from their products. We should implement universal producer take-back programs that would make manufacturers responsible for handling obsolete gear in an environmentally sound way. An example is Dell partnering with Staples to offer free recycling for its equipment. We need regulations for how and where waste is recycled. Dell is a stellar example of electronics waste and recycling processes. They have implemented the electronics disposition policy, banning the export of electronic waste to developing countries. The Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Wastes and Their Disposal is usually known simply as Basel Convention. This is an international treaty that was designed to reduce the movements of hazardous waste between nations, and specifically to prevent transfer of hazardous waste from developed to less developed countries. The convention is also intended to minimize the amount and toxicity of waste generated, to ensure their environmentally sound management as closely as possible to the source of generation, and to assist less developed countries in environmentally sound management of the hazardous and other wastes they generate. Of the 172 parties to this convention, Afghanistan, Haiti, and the United States have signed the convention but have not yet ratified it. The United States remains its biggest violator. More information can be found on this topic. Points of interest would be the PBS documentary regarding Ghana, a digital dumping ground, the Wikipedia article regarding the Basel Convention, and several newspaper articles found in the New York Times, on CNET News, InfoWorld, and high-tech trash coverage in the National Geographic. I thank you for your attention.